All right, next.
What's shaking? My name's Cam.
Hold on, Cam. Hold on. All right, let's go.
Welcome back to another video. So, fun fact, I've never actually written a fantasy book based in an entirely fictional world before. I mean, aside from when I was a literal child and I was ripping off every popular movie I saw. More recently, to my adult life, I did write a few urban fantasy books, but they were set in our world, albeit with some secret, more magical locations. I've read a lot of fantasy over my life and written a fair bit of it as well. So I was actually pretty surprised when I realized how long it's been since I actually created a world. It's exciting though, it's something new for me to try, and that's awesome. You know, I've spent the last
I would obviously building a fantasy slash sci-fi world is much different than building like a romance world. But there is, even though you have like the real world to base your world off of in like a romance or a mystery, that kind of thing, right? You're not having to really build the entire world and its religions and its this, that, or the other thing. You are having to build an individual's world, and just again having those characters, having maybe it's a fake town, but it's like, oh, it's in Virginia, but somewhere we don't know, right? Doing that is still world building, but yeah, it's not as much work, but it is still world building.
2 years or so writing pretty much nothing but horror, which was great. It was fun. But I am really looking forward to going back to my roots. So that's my plans for Nanowrimo this year. I'll be working on the first book in a new fantasy series based in an entirely fictional world. My plan right now is for it to be a bit more of a Western industrial world, still with a lot of classic medieval elements. Kind of like The Witcher meets Red Dead Redemption, for lack of a better example. Okay. Multiple continents with lots of different landscapes and climates. This video is to talk about how I'll be doing the outlining and the world building, including a really awesome tool that I've been playing around a lot with recently. It feels almost more like a video game than an actual writing tool. I've been using it a fair bit to make a map, and it's been a lot of fun.
We know that. We know that. Hey.
Video is not sponsored or anything, I just want to show you. Really quickly though, I will just explain the general plot and series structure that I have planned so far as it stands. I plan on actually writing the first 3 books before I publish any of them. That way I can keep writing and publishing them on a more consistent basis. I want to basically give myself a head start by the time the first book comes out. That might sound a bit...
If you're doing self-publishing, I would actually a little bit kind of advise against that, because I really wish that I had gotten onto the basically kind of got my first book further in the publishing steps than it currently is earlier. Because right now I've got book 1. Book 1 is basically going through its copy editing, and I'm making the book cover for it, and so that will be coming out relatively soon. Book 2 is completely written. It needs to go through probably I'd probably say developmental drafts or developmental edits, probably where it's at, and then it would go through that, and then go through again one last round of edits as far as copy edits and line edits. And then lastly, you've got book 3 that I have that is heavily outlined. How do I put this? I wrote book 3 a long time ago as book 1, but then I realized, you know what, I need to start this story sooner, so I went back, and that required 2 books to bridge the gap from where I started, where I decided to really start, and how to get to book 3. I needed 2 books for that. So book 3 is written, but I have changed a lot of things, so I need to do a lot of updates to it. So it's technically, it has the 150,000 words, but a lot of those words have got to go. A lot of them got to change. So there is that. But I do wish that like having 3 books written, but not having any real traction going on them doesn't feel very good, I guess. Now, however, if you intend to traditionally publish, this could be a good selling point. You know, if you're getting your first book queried, and you can tell them like, hey, I've got books 2 and 3 ready to go as well. That could be a little bit of a bonus for them, because they're like, oh, he's already gotten a ton of it out of the way. We know we've got books 2 and 3 at least. You know, a lot of times authors, or not so many authors, but publishers might be a little worried that the author might not continue writing. So especially if you're a new author, right? If you're not a new author, they might not have that issue. But if you're like a debut author, that might be a little bit of an issue. But by saying that you've got books 2 and 3 in the wing already, then they're going to be a lot more secure in that, as long as your first book, impresses them. So it is up to the individual as far as, just what you think is best for you, how you feel comfortable doing it. I honestly do wish that I had not put book 1 down for so long to do books 2 and then start revising book 3. I really wish that right now I hadn't started the revisions on book 3 at all, and that basically I had rough draft book 2, and then I went back to book 1 and then finished that, and I already had it published. Right? That's my regret. But yeah, it's just one of those things where if you're going to self-publish, it's all up to you. It's all on your shoulders. I also think too that you might run into the issue, especially if you're self-publishing, that you have a head start with 3 books, right? But you might publish one. People are like, "This is great. I can't wait for book 2." And then you're like, "Well, I could just publish book 2 right now. I just put it out there." And people then consume that one real fast. They're like, "I can't wait for book 3." And then you publish book 3, and then boom, it's out there, and your head start's gone. So you do have to really focus on keeping that patience, right? You're gonna have to exercise patience, because people love your book. They want to see book 2, and it's right there waiting for you. You have to say, you know what? I have to wait. I have to give it, like a 6-month breather period, let's say, and then push it out, right? You might have to think about that as well, about that temptation to publish them all a little faster than what you originally planned.
Odd, it might sound like something I'm not going to get done for years, but at the moment I'm actually planning to have these start coming out pretty early next year. The thing is, the books are going to be pretty short, about 50,000 words, and they'll also be quite episodic. What I mean by episodic is that there will be a major high-stakes plot that connects all of the books, and the series will build up and build up and build up towards that major plot, but for the most part, each book will actually have its own little story with a setup, climax, and resolution. I've been reading quite a lot of episodic types of story, not just fantasy, but others as well, adventure, quest type stuff, and I was really inspired, so my plan is to I want to write books that almost feel like you're tuning in for an epic fantasy TV show, with lots of little adventures within an epic story. The stories themselves will follow 2 sellswords or mercenaries that are on the run after escaping from the Empire's most dangerous prison. They'll be hunting monsters, solving mysteries, doing heists. I basically want them to be the Sam and Dean of the fantasy crime world. And the major plot that they'll find themselves involved in eventually will tie into their escape in book 1. It'll tie that escape from the prison into a huge conflict that threatens the state of the world. Again, that's a really, really foundation, ground floor, rough plan for the series so far. It could very well change, but for now, that's what I'm going to be working towards.
Sounds good.
So, outlining a fantasy world, where do you even start? When I was trying to plan how I would be planning, how I would be outlining, I knew I needed to decide a few things very early so that everything else works. 1. Is there magic, and if so, how does it work? 2. How do people talk? Do they sound modern? Do they talk like me and you? Or do they talk a bit more traditional fantasy style? Or is it a mix of both? 3. How does the money and the economy work? And 4. What is the power structure of this world? Like the empire or the authority? Are there multiple kingdoms? Are they at war? Do they live in peace? What is the power structure? Now, I won't tell you exactly what my answers were to those questions. That way the stories have at least a bit of mystery to them. But even before I started thinking about the characters, those were the questions I answered. What I will say though is that I decided not to go with a soft magic system, meaning, just casting spells or wizards with staffs. As much as I love that stuff and as fun as it is, I don't think magic always needs to have like a scientific explanation behind it, but I do want to kind of try that. I didn't want anything to be needlessly complex, so the magic system isn't going to be as extravagant as maybe a Brandon Sanderson novel, but I do want to try more on focusing on characters kind of mixing herbs and chemicals to create magic. The cell swords in this world, that the two major characters are a part of, are actually a bit of a faction. They used to be a really respected organization that functioned almost entirely to help people and maintain peace. They weren't soldiers, they weren't police, they weren't governed by the emperor or the king, but they were generally doing things for a good cause. But as time has gone on, that faction has kind of split. All of the sellswords have become a lot more independent. Some of them have gotten a bit greedy, a bit morally questionable, and now they are basically seen as outlaws. People that can get something done for you for a price, sometimes outside of the law. The characters are going to be interacting with a lot of creatures and inhuman people or races. So to help my outlining, I've actually been creating a bit of a separate bestiary, a document where I just list different fantasy creatures that I'm trying to come up with. And that's been really fun. I completely forgot how fun outlining fantasy actually is. It is a whole different world to planning out a horror or a mystery. Now, my strategy so far with creating monsters and creatures, etc., has been to come up with the abilities and the weaknesses before I decide what they look like, because I think that those abilities and those weaknesses can dictate how they look. For example, the story starts in a desert, so I wanted something dangerous to live in that desert, some kind of monster. Worms have been done, obviously, so I wanted to go in a completely different direction. I decided on a creature that is able to camouflage themselves in the mirage. The fun of like deserts or people wandering through a desert in stories and movies, etc., is them kind of hallucinating things in the mirage. So I wanted a creature that could kind of play with their mind. And in this barren desert, the creature would probably be pretty rabid, pretty starved, which means they would be really aggressive and very likely carnivorous. So once I have these pieces, I was able to create a creature that I think was pretty unique. That's how I've been creating a lot of the creatures. I plan on working...
When I create my creatures, first off, I do think about like how old is the world. If the world's really old and you've got like your civilization kind of like really taking over, then a lot of the creatures are going to be dead, right? They're going to be extinct because whatever it is that's challenging humans or like the humanoid societies is going to be put down pretty roughly, right? We're going to deal with those threats the harshest. We're going to, if it's dragons, let's say, I mean, my story does have dragons, but let's say that you wanted to have dragons in your story, but we've had like 10,000 years to get rid of them, right? Are they still around? Would they still be around? Because usually if we kill a dragon, we're going to smash the eggs. We don't want those dragons we don't want the next generation of dragons to come out, right? So thinking of things like that, where we're going to kill this monster and we're going to kill the young offspring as well to make sure that they don't ever grow up. That's something to keep in mind. Other times also too is, what if it's more like a deer where these things aren't really a threat to us. And as a matter of fact, they're basically a source of food, right? So we want to start kind of protecting their environment, where we say, okay, this forest, we're not going to log it. We're going to keep it as a forest, and we're going to keep all the animals in here totally safe. And every now and again, we'll allow specified hunters to go in. They will be the ones who get to choose like which ones they kill. We're going to make sure that we're killing the old bucks, and that way the young ones can rise up, kind of thing. Like we're going to like really think about how we're doing this to make it to where they thrive rather than eventually die out because of over hunting. That's something to think about. Now, again, you might have a world where it's much more chaotic, where it's much more animalistic, right? Where we're right now we're just in survival mode. We're not in pruning mode, right? You think about like our world. At a certain point, we started to just kind of prune things. We were just kind of keeping nature up as we wanted it to be, and other times it's like, this is too wild. We have to go in and just cull as much as we can to get it down to where we can start pruning it, right? That is kind of, and that could be different regions too. Certain regions could be like, no, we got this on lock. It's totally good. We can do whatever we want to here. So we're keeping animals alive. But if you go down south, that shit's wild. Watch out. Like there's things down there you don't want to mess with. So it depends on the region as well. Typically, I also, he mentioned like kind of weaknesses of monsters, strengths and weaknesses. I do think about that to a certain degree, kind of like, what would this thing's natural predator be? What would this thing's natural prey be? Because if you make a monster, that's one of the reasons why a lot of times when you really think about it, these monsters don't really make a whole lot of sense unless they don't need to eat. Because otherwise, if they needed to eat, they would be consuming so much of like the forest life that they're going to basically strip that forest of all of its animals, because it's going to eat all of the it's going to eat all the deer. Let's say now there's no deer. Now the wolves are going to have to leave or die, and if there's no wolves, then maybe like the beaver population explodes, like that kind of stuff. Like this whole chain of events could happen, cascading events that comes from you introduce a super predator just because you want to have like a dragon fight later on, but you've had the super predator who's out in the wild for, according to your book, hundreds or even thousands of years. This super predator has been out there. What is it actually eating? What is it doing to the ecosystem that you have in place, right? So that's kind of where I come from when I build monsters. Is I have to really rationalize, okay, what kind of monsters do I have? I've got these. Okay, that means that like here's my food chain, because I got to make sure that they can live without the humans observing them, right? It's one of those things where it's kind of like the dragon just actually exists in our imagination until we see it. Then it's there. Now it's trying to eat us, and oh my gosh, it's so hungry. It can devour it can devour a town of people, but it's not doing that ever again or ever before. You know what I mean? Like it was never a problem before, but now that my plot needs it to be a problem, suddenly this thing is just ravenous and it will eat an entire city of people. So think about those are the things that I think about.
On this bestiary quite a bit and creating a lot of creatures, much more creatures than I'm actually planning to use.
I would also say that when it comes to creating creatures, there's nothing wrong with creating creatures. I have created creatures in mind, but it's also one of those things where, how do I put this? It's kind of irrelevant to create your own creatures sometimes. I mean, sometimes you can make up something that's really cool. That's great. And if that's what you really want to do, that's what you really want to kind of like be known for, then put that effort in. But if you're not really going to put like if you're not going to go gung ho with that idea of like, I want to be the the guy who's known for having magical creatures that are like wild as hell and like, you know, you've never seen things like this. If you're not really going for that, then a lot of times like people are just going to forget what it is anyways. They're going to equate it to something that they're more familiar with, and they're just going to be like, okay, it looks like that, but like with razor blade arms or something, I don't know, whatever. And they're just going to go with that. And that might not be anything close to what you were imagining, but that's kind of like what they kind of got, you know, like, it sounds like it's some sort of like chicken kind of thing. I don't know, but like with an alligator head. I don't know. It's big. It's a big thing. Okay, and it's dangerous. I know. I get it. Okay, great. And then they just move on, right? That's the thing that you have to kind of balance that, in my opinion, is if you're going to really introduce something brand new, then again, put that time and effort into it. But if you don't really care that much, because you know you're going to make this monster show up for 3 pages out of your book, why waste the time to make it something that's like really weird and abstract, and like people aren't really going to understand it? They're just going to equate it to something that's real that they know of. Why not just make it something real? You know, it's a giant wolf, right? It's a, you know, we have dragons. We understand what dragons are, right? It's, you know, basically it's a velociraptor, right? Or, you know, maybe you give it a different name. That's fine. Maybe you dress it up a little bit, right? They have, instead of just being green scales, it has some like blue streaks going through it or whatever. Like in the new Jurassic Park movies, they got blue streaks and shit. Like that kind of stuff. You just kind of dress it up a little bit so it's not the same old. But basically people are like, okay, it's a velociraptor. Okay, it's a giant wolf. I know what that is. I can envision it. I know what they're doing. Good, we can go.
Use at the moment. That way when I'm actually writing the stories, I can refer to the bestiary, and that will help me decide where the story can go. Maps. Fantasy maps. One of the best things about fantasy, full stop. I love them. You probably love them. But did you know that you can create your own? Really Absolutely. Easily as well, like surprisingly easily. Again, this video is not sponsored in any way, but I do want to show you 2 programs that I played around with when I was creating a rough draft of my fantasy world. I wanted a map for my outlining so that I can visually see the path that the characters will be taking and what things they will come across on that path. I find it really helps with coming up with ideas for the story, especially with an episodic story like this where something is going to happen in each book that is somewhat self-contained. I can plan a route for the characters, maybe through a forest or a swamp or a cave system. I can see where those things are with a map, and it makes sense. Anyway, first up, I'll quickly show you the free program. It's called Incarnate. You can do quite a bit with this one, and they have a free version for you to use. This will be great for the people that just want to create a really simple minimalistic map, which tons of authors do.
But it looks really good.
It's actually a problem that a lot of authors run into when they're creating a fantasy map, is that they just make it too hectic, too busy. If you do want something a bit more intricate or colorful though, I would recommend Wonder Draft. The links for these programs will be in the description below, but this one, it's not too expensive. It's $30 US for a full license, meaning you pay that once, and you get a ton of stuff that you can use to create your map. I will say a final time this video.
Yeah, I use Wonder Draft. And you can do things with it that I didn't do. I've seen, you know, their example maps are absolutely phenomenal. Mine don't touch it. But you can see, like, you know, you can make your text curved. You have different lettering. It makes it really easy to do these kind of waterways and things of that nature. So it's one of those things where it is actually it is a really good tool. I liked it a lot, and it wasn't a subscription. I don't know if it still is. I bought it when it was like in beta a number of years ago, and because I bought it in beta, I got some of the extra packs. So like I think Dwarven pack, like this is a Dwarven icon, and so is this. Those are, I think, in a separate pack that's like an extra $5, something like that. The base kit does come with its own stuff, of course, but there are some extra packs, and I got a number of those, and I think they have like 2 or 3 more packs that came out after that I don't have. But I mean, that's okay. So yeah, it's a good program, and it's really simple to use. You can see how you can make things bigger and smaller as you see fit. And there's a lot of things in there that you can use to make the map look pretty unique.
It was not sponsored, but this program was so easy to use, dude. I made this map on my very first try, basically not even knowing what I was doing. You pretty much just drag and drop everything. I am going to redo my map, of course, make it look at least a bit more realistic. I just feel like this one looks a bit too cartoony. Looks like it's from a straight up children's fantasy. It also it also kind of looks like a uterus, so that's something I want to steer away from. Creating maps is pretty fun, even if you're not writing a story. Some people use these programs for D&D planning because you can create a city map or a dungeon map, and I'm not too worried about making a world that is 100% geographically accurate.
Now with
I know
Wonder Draft, I've never been able to make a city map out of it. So maybe Intuit has a city map editor, and this might just be the license that I have, being that I bought it when it was in beta, and I did get updates later on that were still like, after beta ended, but it might just be like the license that I have. I don't have the ability really to make like a good looking city, I guess you could say. Because it would just be like the same icons. Like I have these icons that I'm using for, like this is a large city icon. Well, I could use it again as like a castle or cathedral icon in the city, but it's retooling the same icon. That to me seems a little not so great. But yeah, I guess you could do it that way. It just doesn't. I've seen others that look more like you've got a large world map, and then you've got like an actual city map with its own different icons.
People that nitpick at stuff like that, like how does that mountain range exist where it is, that kind of thing. I'm not too worried about that. To a certain extent, obviously.
To a certain extent.
I'm not going to have like a snow biome next to a volcanic desert biome, but I do want to have fun with this world, and I want to create...
The thing is that you have to understand that you can have a snow biome next to a volcano desert biome. It just needs to be tiered, because I mean, when you think that everything's flat, then yeah, if everything was flat, then the volcano and sand biome is not going to then suddenly become a snow biome, really. What you need is elevation, right? That would make it work if you had elevation, so these mountains jut up, and now you do have a snow biome because it's just so high up, right? That makes perfect sense. You do want to think about where you have your stuff. Basically, because there is kind of a way that worlds work as far as like how biomes actually really come into existence. So you do kind of want to think about that. Like you'll notice that my biome has these mountain ranges on the sides, and then this mountain range across the top, right? That's a question. That's a question mark. Mountain ranges really only are going to form like this. They're going to form from north to south. Forming from east to west is extremely uncommon unless something occurred, right? So that's a hint. Something must have occurred here to make this mountain range do this. Otherwise, it shouldn't. Yeah.
A fantasy world, and sometimes that's going to have some slightly unrealistic...
I'll get to it here in a second,
biomes,
once
and
you
mountain
finish this.
ranges. Who cares? It's fantasy. I am doing lots of outlining at the moment, but once NaNoWriMo starts, I will be officially writing this series, and I could not be more excited. Like I said, it feels like I'm going back to my roots. Fantasy was pretty much all I wrote before a couple of years ago. But for the time being, let me know how your writing's going. How is your outlining? Are you doing NaNoWriMo? Do you have like a checklist when you're outlining fantasy? Let me know. But for the time being, thank you so much for watching, especially for watching through the whole video. I appreciate you, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Catch ya.
Catch ya. One thing I would say about doing maps is sometimes you only need to do the map, and you'll notice this in a lot of fantasy books where they only have a map of like the region that the characters are going to be moving through, right? So it's kind of like if you think about like our world, imagine that the characters are only going to be in Europe going through like Spain over to Poland, right? You would want to have the entire map of Europe then, because more than likely a lot of those other countries like Norway and Sweden and England could come into play. Maybe if they go through the Mediterranean, you're going to have like the upper or the top side of Africa, right? Those are going to be countries that you're going to want to include in the map because that's what they're actually going to be going through, right? Or they're going to be near, or that other characters who are going to be in their path have come from, right? So you don't have to make your entire world, especially when you first sit down. It would probably be a good idea if you did, but you don't have to. You could easily make like, here's the world as we need to know it. We can allude to that there are other continents. We don't need to describe what they look like or anything like that because we're not over there. And then later on, we add those continents in, right? We then go into detail on what those look like. And you can even do like part of the continent, right? You don't have to do the whole thing if they're not traveling the entire continent. You can just do like the northern part. Like in my first book, the only continent that they're in is going to be on Geddon. The main characters start in the High Temple, they go down here, and they come back over here, and then they end it here, right? It's all in here. They don't ever go down here, they don't ever go down here, and they sure as hell don't go over here, right? So in that book, I give them the world map as it shows currently, right? There's more world than this. But I give them this world map, and then I give them a zoomed in version of this so they can see it a little easier. But that's what that's my thoughts on maps is, you don't have to have your entire globe represented on your first map. So don't feel like if you don't know what other continents you want to have, or that you feel locked in to your continents. Like, because if you make your entire globe and then suddenly you're like, well, I need another continent for these other people to come from, then you might feel like you're pigeonholed, right? But so just to avoid that, don't do it.